The Arkansas Republican State Convention met on June 8th, and as we have often said, it is this body within the RPA that has the final authority on all party matters. Here to debrief and break it all down for us is 2nd District Chairman Jennifer Lancaster. Hey, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us again in the studio.
Thanks for having me, Jenny.
Well, I think after the June 8th meeting, you were elected temporary chairman of the day. That was a 10-hour meeting. I'm just grateful to have you in, especially just to have someone from your perspective to debrief the day's happening. So thank you, first of all.
Of course.
As I mentioned, you were first elected temporary chair of that day. And we mentioned this in our article that came out about the rules changes and the platform changes that were passed. Just to clarify for everyone, you were not elected as the new RPA chair. That was temporary and then permanent chair of the state convention. Just briefly talk about that, if you would.
Sure. So during any convention, there's always a temporary and a permanent chair that are elected. And as you said, I was elected both temporary and then permanent chair. So my term is just during the convention. I am not the chair of the RPA. Mr. Joe Wood is still the chairman of the RPA. I'm just the chair of the convention itself.
And then if you would give us your perspective from that day. I know that there were, how many delegates? I think we started out that morning with a little over 600. Is that right?
663 approximately.
Okay. And so I know how things were from the delegates' perspective, but just talk to us briefly what it was like from your perspective as chair of the convention.
Yes. Well, first, it was such an honor. I mean, truly an honor to be up there and have a front row seat and seeing the people govern their party as it was designed. It was just a really neat experience. Of course, there was a lot of back and forth. The day started out chaotic. Unfortunately, as we mentioned in the previous interview, the Credentials Committee was not allowed to do their job. So the Credentials Committee is the group of individuals that are to look at the list of delegates that are submitted to make sure that their election or to make sure that they were properly elected, not appointed, and that basically their position conforms with the rules. Well, despite multiple requests, those credential committee members were never allowed to even see the list. And so they weren't allowed to do their job. They had a meeting the night before, or I think it was the afternoon before the convention. And even then, multiple credentials members were asking for the list. And the chairman just said, no, we're not going to give it to you. You don't need to see it. And so then the motion was made and passed that they would just move the list to the convention. So it was not to approve it, not to review it, nothing substantive. It was to move it to the convention, which then shifted the responsibility to the convention body to go through those lists and make sure that they were done properly. Now, under Robert's Rules of Order, those lists are supposed to be disseminated to the members of the Credentials Committee well in advance because it is imperative that the members that are allowed to vote are, in fact, eligible members under our rules. And so that is why those almost 3 to 4 hours of credentialing is completely unnecessary. But sadly, the job had to be done so that when we concluded the convention, people could feel like it was done appropriately and fairly and in conformance with our rules.
I think, I saw a lot of comments on social media or have had people say, oh, the housekeeping took forever. It was unnecessary how long it took. It should have only taken an hour and a half. It lasted so long. But you're telling us it didn't have to be that way. That all of that could have been avoided had the credentialing committee followed the rules?
Right. If the RPA and the credentials chair had followed the rules, because the credentials members, I know a couple of them who were ready and willing and eager to do their job that they had been tasked with, but they were just not allowed to do so. So that caused at least almost 4 hours of delay and some back and forth because people were they were confused. And of course, we're having to go through lists that nobody had seen before. And we're having to deal with a responsibility that was not the responsibility of the convention. But got shifted to the responsibility of the convention by the Credentials Committee, who did not want to do their job in large part. So that is what ended up happening. Now, once I assumed the chair position, the parliamentarian who was to my left, he was elected by the RPA, he was hired by the RPA. I think he was aware that I had been telling people he is merely an advisor, because he asked a couple of times that he should leave. And I said, no, you're welcome to stay. And, there were a couple of times where we did have some discussion back and forth. I would say in large part, we agreed completely. And we had a very friendly rapport. But there were a few things that we disagreed on and we would discuss. And I think some of the members could tell that we were in disagreement. It was civil, but in disagreement. So they would ask for his opinion. And even then, he would always ask for my permission, like, can I go ahead and speak? And I said, absolutely, go ahead and tell them your thoughts. And then even at one point, he apologized for disagreeing with me. And I said, you don't have to apologize. I'm fine with people disagreeing with me, and I appreciate the civil discussion, because it's all about coming up with the right conclusion, right? And so there were a couple of times people probably saw that I would ask Margot Herzl and Sarah Dunklin to approach. And that's because me and the parliamentarian might have a different perspective on some of the rules. But of course, I had some other conversations going on that I'll tell you about in a moment that I didn't really have the time. I certainly didn't want to delay the proceedings any further. So I would ask them to come up and have the discussion. And most of the time I could overhear the discussion and come up with my own conclusion. But sometimes I would have to deal with other issues. They would converse and then let me know what they thought. So I was kind of acting as judge in that respect. So that's why you saw a couple individuals off to my left, but then off to my right. Almost immediately after I took the chair position, I had a representative from Embassy Suites and Seth Mays, the executive director of the RPA, coming up and telling me we were going to have to get out of the building. And, so that's when I called up my husband. I said, will you please deal with this? And so he was talking to them, and he even offered to pay to extend the contract so that our people could stay in the room and not have to be moved or adjourn. And at one point, it certainly seemed Seth Mays said he was willing to extend the contract. He and the representative from Embassy Suites went outside, and shortly after that, we were being told that we had to leave because there was an event the next morning that they had to set up for. It turns out that there was not an event. I stayed at the Embassy Suites that night, and I went back at 8:30 and then again at 2:30, and the room had not been touched. It hadn't even been cleaned. So that was not true, but nonetheless, of course, I didn't know that at the time. So that's why there were so many discussions going on at the podium, because the representative kept coming up to me, and then Seth kept telling me we're going to have to get out. Now, in addition to that, I want to address one other thing that kept happening. I think a lot of people noticed that there were a lot of standing counts that those were requested. And at first, I had a feeling it was to delay, but I didn't know exactly what the goal was at that time. But I could tell a lot of them were not necessary, but if somebody's going to ask for standing count, we'll do standing count. So the standing count, it is my observation and conclusion at this point, that was designed to run down the clock. And the reason why is because then the executive director was having the staff tell us we had to leave. And just as they were starting to turn off the lights, that is when Seth Mays told me we needed to move up the electors up on the agenda. And I said, I'm not doing that. And he said, why? And I said, because as soon as we do that, you all are going to leave. And then, it would be a question of whether or not we had quorum. So I was not going to do that until the people had the opportunity to discuss and decide on the proposed rules and platform changes. So that is what was going on at the podium in large part. Of course, there was one time where I heard a different number than what the secretary and someone else had heard, so we had to iron that out. And then the chairs who were doing the counting couldn't remember what number they gave us. Then we had to figure that out. There was a lot going on. So I really appreciate everybody's patience with that. And I just wanted to let them know what was happening. But of course, yes, we were eventually told we had to leave the building, and then leave that room. But fortunately, the 2nd Congressional District had reserved a room all day in anticipation that maybe something like this would happen and the room would be needed. And that's when we moved to another location, to our reserved room. And it was shortly after we got everyone seated that the fire marshal would come. So we just had all kinds of hoops to jump through. But guess what? We just kept jumping. And we did it together. And it was just really exciting. And despite the hurdles that were thrown in front of us, to see the people come together and stand together, come what may, to discuss and deliberate these important issues for the betterment of our state was really exciting, and it was just such an honor to be trusted to be the facilitator of those discussions.
You ran on as far as temporary chair and permanent chair of the state convention, giving the people their voice and allowing their voice to be heard and having the opportunity, like you said, come what may, have the opportunity to have those timely submitted platform and rules submissions to be heard. Do you think that is why there was such an overwhelming, I would say, win for you regarding temporary chair and then ultimately permanent chair at that convention? And then that was really, from then on, I would say, those that wanted things to be heard really paved the way for the direction of that remaining state convention.
Yes, I think the big distinction on Saturday was there were those who wanted a very structured and rigid program that limited debate and discussion, and in some cases wouldn't even allow for it, as we saw in our previous interview where the RPA was saying that because certain committees had not approved the people's timely submissions, that they could not be brought before the body.
Yeah.
And so I disagreed with that. As I said, those proposed rules and platform changes had been timely submitted, and I do not believe it is it is within the committee's authority, the Rules or Platform Committee's authority, to restrict consideration of the state delegation. So yes, that was my position. I was going to let everybody discuss and be heard, anybody who wanted to speak, as long as their motions were not dilatory or intended to cause delay. Then we would absolutely hear them and we would discuss them. This happens every 2 years. This is not a regular occurrence. And I think when you bring this many people together with something so important as the direction of our state, especially in the current political climate, we should have some real thoughtful discussions that should not be limited to a mere couple of hours.
What type of message do you think Saturday sent to the RPA leadership, establishment, and ultimately the state? What do you think they're taking away or they should take away from Saturday?
Well, I hope it's understood that the people are involved, they are passionate, and they are demanding to have a say in the direction of our party politics, as they should. You know, that conforms with our own state motto and with the foundation of our country, which is that the people rule. And this is a limited government, and we believe that which is closest to the people is that which governs best. So when you have the opportunity to let the people govern, as we did on Saturday, even the affairs of their party, then you should certainly do so and not try to restrict them. Again, those individuals were there representing their respective counties. You don't get much closer than that. Mm-hmm. So, yes, I hope that the party and the legislators all understand that this was not personal. What happened was purely on principle, and that the people are just demanding to have more of a say and participate. And I think that should be exciting for everyone, especially our party and the legislators, seeing that the people are engaged and wanting to have these thoughtful discussions in a very helpful way. That should be exciting to every Republican.
I want to talk to you briefly about this. I've seen this in some news articles and then in the DemGaz and then in a few others. It insinuated that you did not follow the rules regarding the convention. And even the Washington County chairman said that specifically regarding closed primaries, he did not consider Arkansas to have closed primaries because he did not consider that the rules were followed appropriately. Therefore, it did not go into effect because it's basically null and void. What do you say to that when someone says, well, the rules weren't followed at the state convention? What is your response?
I can tell you that the rules were absolutely followed. This narrative that they've started is also not uncommon. We've seen this in the past from them, and we can look back as recent as 2022 when they accused Pulaski County and their 70-plus delegates that they were angry at because Pulaski County elected grassroots individuals over elected officials to be state delegates. So in retaliation, they started accusing Lori Justice and those delegates of breaking the rules, but they never pointed to a single rule that was broken. And the same case is here. They're going to just make this blanket statement that we broke the rules, which we didn't. I guarantee you we did not. And that's just how they're going to try to attack us. And, people who are looking for a fight and people who are just bitter over what happened Saturday, they're going to cling to anything.
Yeah.
And they're going to, but if what everyone should notice is that they do not point to a single rule that was broken, whereas our side can point to multiple rules that were broken in multiple instances.
And I think it's really interesting that this conversation is even happening now after the fact. I think it was Randy Alexander from Benton County. He got up to the mic during discussion about whether or not this, we should allow these to be heard from the floor. And correct me if I'm wrong, but at one point he said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, we're here having this discussion because ironically, our rules committee did not follow the rules. And the parliamentarian, did he comment or say something about what the rules and platform committees should have done?
He did. He acknowledged that the rules and platform committee were wrong and that they did violate the rules. And then he questioned the notice issue. But this is the state convention, and that was one of the times that he was wrong.
Yeah.
The state convention actually does not require that notice in order to hear the proposed rules and platform changes.
Yeah.
But he was confusing it with another section of rules.
Yeah.
I don't think it was coming from a bad place.
Yeah, I don't either. I think one thing and another thing that's just really interesting to see is there was a lot of reform done on Saturday. And when there's that much shakeup, you are bound to have some people upset, and such as special interest groups, lobbyists, consultants, constitutional officers, and those elected officials, because there is now, and we talked about this, the overall theme of Saturday, really, when you look at the rules changes, that resolution from Governor Sanders' brother, John Mark Huckabee, when you look at those things, the overarching theme is more of an equalization of power, less concentration of power at the top, and bringing it down, like you talked about, to the most local level. And I think people, and you can speak to this, but I think people should watch their elected officials and see how they respond to what happened on Saturday, because I think that would be very telling. What do you think?
I agree 100%. So yes, there was some significant changes that were done on Saturday. And of course, anytime there's change, most people bristle, right? They're not always so comfortable and welcoming of change. But these were changes that have been a long time coming. Closing the primaries, that's been discussed for years.
Yeah.
I believe that conversation was really started by Jason Bollinger years ago. And the people have been wanting it, but the party and the and elected officials have done what they can to prevent it. And finally, the people said, no, we really believe this needs to happen. But yes, I think now is a great opportunity to be watching how certain lobbyists and elected officials and legislators do respond, because there are some who were happy to see that the people were getting involved and they want to have more of a say in the party politics, and they want to have more say in the direction of our state.
Yeah.
And to those people, those are our representatives, and they understand what their role is.
Yeah.
There are others who are very angry, namely some lobbyists and special interest groups, of course, because they have used the party to protect and insulate their elected officials. And so there's this very symbiotic relationship that's been going on there that got shaken up with some of the passages of the rules this past weekend. But yes, to your point, be watching for those people who are very bitter and threatening. There were some legislators and other individuals who were on the floor Saturday who were cussing and threatening lawsuits and legislation to stop us. You need to watch those people, because they are not the ones that are representing the will of the people. There are some who I think may be hurt and may have taken Saturday's actions as a sign of mistrust, and that's not it. They should not take it personally. This was not personal. This was just, as you said, an equalization of power. They have almost complete authority over in the Capitol, and the party itself, that should be governed entirely by the people. Yeah. And we should work together. This is an opportunity for us to work together, where the people have a say and a voice, and we're having this meaningful dialogue between the party and the elected officials. And we can have a great relationship going forward. And I'm hopeful that everybody agrees with that. And there's we can put any bitterness and animosity aside, and just move forward for the best interest of our state.
Anything else that you want to add that we haven't covered?
No, I think that's it.
Thank you so much for always coming in and talking to us at Conduit. We really appreciate it and hope that you come back on again soon.
I will, and thank you for all that you at Conduit do.
Thank you.